My name is Madison and I'm 28 years old. I thought family Sunday dinners were about love and support until the night my father looked me straight in the eye and declared I was cut off from any family financial help. The shock hit me like ice water. Here I was, sitting at our mahogany dining table where I'd shared countless meals, suddenly feeling like a stranger in my own family. But what happened next changed everything forever. Before we dive into the story, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what family traditions mean to you. Hit that like button if you've ever felt underestimated by the people closest to you, and don't forget to subscribe because trust me, you'll want to see how this unfolds. Growing up in our picture-perfect suburban home felt like living inside a magazine spread. My father Robert owned the most successful construction company in our county, building custom homes for wealthy clients who appreciated his attention to detail and old-school craftsmanship. Mom Patricia ran a boutique marketing firm that specialized in luxury brands, working with clients who paid premium prices for her sophisticated aesthetic and strategic mind. Our house perfectly reflected their success. The pristine white colonial sat on 2 manicured acres, complete with Patricia's prized rose garden and Robert's restored 1957 Chevrolet gleaming in the circular driveway. Every Sunday, our family gathered around the formal dining room table, a mahogany masterpiece that seated 12 but felt intimate when it was just the 5 of us. I was the middle child, sandwiched between my older brother Michael and younger sister Jessica. Michael had followed the path Robert laid out for him, graduating summa cum laude from law school and landing a coveted position at the city's most prestigious firm. At 31, he was already being groomed for partnership, handling corporate mergers that made headlines in the business section. Jessica, 3 years younger than me, was the family's shining star. She'd sailed through pre-med with a perfect GPA and was now in her 3rd year of medical school, specializing in pediatric surgery. Her professors called her brilliant. Her clinical supervisors raved about her steady hands and compassionate bedside manner. Patricia kept every newspaper clipping about Jessica's academic achievements in a leather scrapbook. Then there was me, the creative one. That's how they introduced me at family gatherings, with that particular tone parents use when they're trying to sound supportive, but you can hear the underlying concern. While Michael studied corporate law and Jessica memorized anatomy textbooks, I'd chosen business communications with a focus on digital marketing. During college, I started taking freelance projects to pay for textbooks and coffee money. I designed websites for local restaurants, managed social media accounts for small boutiques, created promotional materials for campus events. What began as survival money slowly grew into something bigger, but whenever I mentioned my projects at Sunday dinner, the conversation would politely shift back to Michael's latest courtroom victory or Jessica's research publications. "That's nice, sweetheart," Patricia would say with that smile mothers perfect when they're humoring their children. But what about internships at real companies? You need experience with established organizations. Robert's approach was more direct. "Madison, when are you going to stop playing around with this computer stuff and get serious about your future? You need benefits, job security, a retirement plan. This freelance nonsense isn't sustainable." I'd try to explain that digital marketing was the future, that businesses were desperately seeking online presence, that I was learning skills that would be invaluable in the coming decades. But their eyes would glaze over, and somehow the conversation always circled back to how proud they were of Michael's billable hours or Jessica's surgical rotation acceptance. The Sunday dinners followed the same comfortable rhythm. Patricia would spend hours preparing elaborate meals, herb-crusted lamb, or her famous Coke au vin, always served on the good china with crystal glasses that caught the light from the chandelier overhead. We'd dress nicely, gathering at 6 sharp, and share updates about our weeks while classical music played softly in the background. I loved these moments, feeling surrounded by family warmth and tradition. But there was always an undercurrent of unspoken expectations, a subtle pressure to conform to their definition of success. Michael and Jessica fit seamlessly into this vision. I felt like I was constantly trying to translate my world into terms they'd understand and approve of. After graduation, when I announced my intention to pursue freelancing full-time instead of applying for corporate marketing positions, the concerned looks became more pronounced. Patricia started forwarding job listings from major companies. Robert offered to create a position for me at his construction firm, handling their administrative work and client communications. It would be perfect, he'd say. Steady income, health insurance, and you'd be learning the business from the ground up. Who knows? Maybe someday you could take over the marketing side of things. The offer was generous, and I knew it came from love. But something inside me rebelled against the idea of stepping into a role they'd carved out for me. I wanted to build something of my own, to prove that my instincts about the digital revolution were correct. I wanted to succeed on my own terms, not as Robert's daughter who got handed a comfortable position. So I politely declined, moved into a tiny studio apartment downtown, and prepared to build my empire from scratch. I had no idea that this decision would eventually lead to the most dramatic Sunday dinner of my life. Moving into that 400-square-foot studio apartment felt like stepping into a different universe. After years of living in my parents' pristine suburban sanctuary, my new neighborhood was a jarring contrast. The building was a converted warehouse in the arts district, surrounded by vintage clothing stores, independent coffee shops, and galleries showcasing local artists. My parents were horrified. "Madison, this area isn't safe," Patricia fretted during my first week there. "There are homeless people on the corners, and I heard there was a break-in just 2 blocks away last month." Robert was even more direct. "You're throwing money away on rent when you could live at home for free and save up for a real place. This is financial irresponsibility at its finest." What they couldn't understand was that I needed this independence, this space to think and create without the weight of their expectations pressing down on me. My studio might have been small, but it was mine. I set up my workspace by the single large window, arranging my laptop, external monitors, and design supplies with the precision of a surgeon preparing for operation. Those first months were brutal. I lived on ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches, carefully tracking every expense in a detailed spreadsheet. My furniture consisted of an air mattress, a folding table from a garage sale, and one plastic chair I'd rescued from a neighbor's trash pile. But I was building something, and that sense of purpose sustained me through the loneliness and uncertainty. My breakthrough came when I landed my first major client, a tech startup called Innovate Tech Solutions. They were developing an app for sustainable home energy management and needed a complete digital marketing overhaul. The founders, 2 brilliant engineers in their early 20s, had revolutionary technology but no idea how to communicate its benefits to potential customers. I spent 3 weeks crafting their brand identity, designing their website, creating their social media strategy, and developing a launch campaign that positioned them as the future of smart home technology. When their app debuted, downloads exceeded projections by 300% in the first month. They paid me $5,000, more money than I'd ever seen in one place. I called home that night, bursting with excitement. "Mom, Dad, you won't believe what just happened. I just completed this amazing project and—" "That's wonderful, honey," Patricia interrupted gently. "But you know, $5,000 isn't really sustainable income. You can't count on projects like that happening regularly." Robert's voice carried that familiar tone of paternal concern. "Madison, I'm proud that you're trying, but you need to think long-term. What happens when these little projects dry up? You can't build a life on unpredictable income." Their reaction deflated my joy, but it also sparked something deeper: determination. I realized that they wouldn't understand my success until it became undeniable. So I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of upgrading my lifestyle with that $5,000 payment, I invested every penny. I'd been studying market trends obsessively, reading financial publications, following tech industry leaders on social media. There was a small biotechnology company called MedAdvance Corporation that had developed a revolutionary wound healing treatment. Their stock was undervalued because they were still in clinical trials, but my research convinced me they were onto something groundbreaking. I put my entire payment into MedAdvance stock at $12 per share. 6 months later, when their treatment received FDA approval, the stock hit $43 per share. My $5,000 had become nearly $18,000. That success introduced me to William Harrison, a seasoned venture capitalist who became my unofficial mentor. We met at a young entrepreneurs networking event where I was presenting my digital marketing services. William approached me afterward, intrigued by my presentation about the intersection of digital marketing and investment strategy. "You have an interesting perspective," he said over coffee the following week. "Most people see marketing and investing as separate disciplines, but you understand how they're connected. Consumer behavior, market trends, emerging technologies. It's all related." William taught me about portfolio diversification, risk management, and the importance of patient capital. He introduced me to other successful investors, recommended books that expanded my understanding of market psychology, and shared insights from his 25 years of building wealth through strategic investments. Under his guidance, my approach became more sophisticated. I diversified across different sectors, conducted thorough research on every potential investment, and built relationships with industry insiders who could provide early intelligence about emerging opportunities. My marketing clients became valuable sources of market intelligence. When I worked with companies in emerging industries, I gained insider knowledge about trends before they hit mainstream awareness. Meanwhile, my marketing business continued growing. Word spread about my success with Innovate Tech Solutions, and I started attracting clients from established companies seeking to modernize their digital presence. I worked with luxury retailers, professional service firms, and even some manufacturing companies looking to reach younger demographics. But at family dinners, my achievements were consistently minimized. When I mentioned landing a contract with a regional restaurant chain worth $15,000, Michael would share news about a merger he'd facilitated worth millions. When I talked about helping a local boutique increase their online sales by 400%, Jessica would discuss her research on pediatric cardiac procedures. The pattern became predictable. I'd share my successes, receive polite acknowledgement, and then watch the conversation pivot to my siblings' more legitimate accomplishments. Patricia would beam with pride discussing Jessica's clinical rotations. Robert would expand enthusiastically about Michael's prospects for partnership. I started keeping my wins to myself, focusing instead on building my empire quietly. My investment portfolio grew from thousands to tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands. I was becoming wealthy, but I maintained my modest lifestyle deliberately. I wanted to prove that success wasn't about flashy displays or expensive possessions. It was about building something lasting. What my family didn't know was that I was about to become more than just successful. I was about to become their secret lifeline, investing in their lives in ways they couldn't imagine. My transformation from struggling freelancer to investment prodigy happened faster than I'd ever imagined possible. The combination of insider knowledge from my marketing clients and William's mentorship created opportunities that seemed almost magical in retrospect. My second major breakthrough came through a project with a small software company called DataStream Analytics. They'd hired me to redesign their website and create content marketing strategies, but during our collaboration, I learned they were developing artificial intelligence tools for predictive market analysis. The technology was revolutionary, but they were hemorrhaging cash trying to perfect their algorithms. I saw the potential immediately. Their AI could identify market patterns that human analysts missed, predicting stock movements with remarkable accuracy. While they struggled to find investors who understood their vision, I quietly purchased a 30% stake for $50,000, nearly my entire savings at the time. 8 months later, Google acquired DataStream Analytics for $47 million. My investment returned over $4 million, transforming me from a small-time freelancer into someone with serious wealth. But instead of celebration, I felt a strange emptiness. The people I most wanted to share this victory with were the same people who'd consistently dismissed my judgment and abilities. I called William that night, trying to process my emotions. "I should be ecstatic," I told him. "This changes everything for me financially. But all I can think about is how my family will probably find some way to minimize the success too." "Madison," William said gently, "you're learning one of wealth's hardest lessons. Sometimes the people closest to us have the most difficulty accepting our transformation. They've invested in a particular image of who we are, and our success threatens their understanding of themselves. His words proved prophetic during our next Sunday dinner. I decided to share my data stream success, hoping they'd finally understand the scope of what I was building. But when I mentioned the acquisition, Robert's first response was concern about tax implications. Patricia worried about whether I had proper legal representation. Michael offered to review my contracts to ensure I hadn't been taken advantage of. Nobody asked about my vision for the company, my analysis that led to the investment, or my plans for scaling the success. They treated my biggest victory like a lucky accident that needed their professional expertise to manage properly. That dinner marked a turning point in my relationship with wealth and family. I decided to build my fortune strategically and secretly, becoming successful enough that dismissal would become impossible. But more importantly, I started researching my family's financial situations, discovering opportunities to support them without their knowledge. Robert's construction company, RB Construction, was facing serious challenges. The housing market had softened, and several major projects had been delayed due to permit issues. Through my business connections, I learned that the city was planning a massive redevelopment project that would require exactly the kind of custom residential work Robert specialized in. I created a shell company called Meridian Investment Partners and quietly purchased distressed properties in the redevelopment zone. When the city announced their plans 6 months later, property values soared, and I found myself sitting on investments worth millions. More importantly, I leveraged these holdings to secure contracts for Robert's company, essentially guaranteeing his business would thrive for the next 5 years. Patricia's marketing firm was struggling to compete with larger agencies that offered comprehensive digital services. I approached her biggest competitor and negotiated a strategic partnership that would allow Patricia's firm to handle their luxury brand accounts while they provided digital infrastructure support. The arrangement, structured through another shell company I controlled, essentially guaranteed Patricia's firm would double their revenue within 2 years. Even Jessica benefited from my growing wealth and connections. Medical school was expensive, and I learned she'd taken substantial student loans despite the family's financial success. I established an anonymous scholarship fund specifically for surgical students with exceptional academic records. Jessica received a full scholarship for her final 2 years, never knowing it came from her sister's investment profits. My portfolio grew beyond individual stock picks into real estate, emerging technologies, and strategic partnerships with other successful investors. I was building wealth faster than most people could spend it, but I maintained my modest lifestyle religiously. I still lived in the same studio apartment, drove my reliable Honda Civic, and shopped at thrift stores for most of my clothes. The contrast between my financial reality and my family's perception of my situation became almost comical. At Sunday dinners, they'd express concern about my uncertain income while I mentally calculated that my portfolio had grown by more than their combined annual salaries during the previous quarter. Patricia would slip me $50 for groceries while I owned properties worth millions. Robert would offer to help with my rent while I was secretly financing his company's expansion. Michael would share networking opportunities for entry-level marketing positions, while I was being courted by venture capital firms seeking my investment expertise. The hardest part wasn't maintaining the secret, it was watching them worry about me unnecessarily. I wanted to ease their concerns, to share my success, and celebrate together. But their consistent pattern of dismissing my achievements had created a barrier I didn't know how to cross. William helped me understand that my family's response reflected their own insecurities rather than any failure on my part. Success threatens people who've built their identity around being the successful ones, he explained. Your father defined himself as the family's financial leader. Your mother takes pride in her business acumen. Your siblings have invested years building their professional reputations. Your rapid success in an unfamiliar field challenges all of those identities. As my wealth approached 8 figures, I realized I was facing a choice. I could continue building my empire in secret, maintaining family harmony while sacrificing authentic relationships. Or I could find a way to share my truth, risking their reaction but creating space for genuine connection. That choice was made for me on a Sunday evening that started like any other, but ended with my family's entire understanding of reality shattered beyond repair. The Sunday that changed everything began with subtle signs of the storm approaching. I arrived at my parents' house at 5:30, as always, but immediately noticed something different. Patricia's new kitchen appliances gleamed under professional-grade lighting that hadn't been there the previous week. The countertops had been replaced with Italian marble, and a wine refrigerator hummed quietly in the corner. Robert's restored Chevrolet had been joined by a brand-new Tesla Model S in the driveway, its sleek lines reflecting the late afternoon sun. Through the garage windows, I could see his workshop had been expanded and equipped with premium tools that would make any craftsman envious. "Wow, Mom," I said, running my fingers along the smooth marble. "These renovations are incredible. Business must be going really well." Patricia beamed with pride, adjusting a fresh bouquet of white orchids that probably cost more than my monthly groceries. "Your father landed that big development contract downtown. 20 custom homes for the luxury market. We decided it was time to invest in some upgrades we've been wanting for years." I smiled and nodded, knowing exactly which development contract she meant. The one I'd essentially orchestrated through my property investments and strategic positioning. But I kept that knowledge to myself, as I had with countless other family successes I'd quietly facilitated. Michael arrived 10 minutes later with his usual confidence, wearing a tailored suit that screamed success. At 31, he carried himself like someone who'd never questioned his place in the world or worried about his next career move. He kissed Patricia's cheek and shook Robert's hand with the firm grip of someone accustomed to closing important deals. "You'll never believe what happened this week," Michael announced as we gathered in the living room for pre-dinner cocktails. "The senior partners called me into a meeting yesterday. They're fast-tracking my partnership review. If everything goes according to plan, I'll be the youngest partner in the firm's history." Robert clapped his son on the shoulder with obvious pride. "That's my boy. I always knew you had what it takes to reach the top. Hard work and dedication, that's what success requires." Jessica arrived last, looking exhausted but radiant in the way medical students master when they're surviving on caffeine and determination. Her designer scrubs had been replaced by casual clothes, but her medical bag and pristine textbooks indicated she'd come straight from the hospital. "Sorry I'm late," she said, accepting Patricia's hug. "I've been working with Dr. Martinez on a complex pediatric case. We just received approval to try an experimental procedure that could be groundbreaking for children with congenital heart defects." Patricia's eyes filled with proud tears. "Our daughter, saving children's lives. I can barely comprehend how brilliant you've become." As we moved to the dining room, I noticed Jessica's textbooks were the latest editions, expensive volumes that would typically strain a medical student's budget. Her laptop was top of the line, and she mentioned having access to private research databases that usually required institutional sponsorship. I knew exactly how she'd gained access to these resources. The anonymous scholarship I'd established through my foundation covered not just tuition, but also provided research grants and equipment allowances for exceptional students. Jessica had benefited from my success without ever knowing it. Dinner conversation flowed through its familiar patterns. Michael shared details about his latest corporate merger, explaining complex legal strategies with the confidence of someone who genuinely loved his work. Jessica described her surgical rotations with passion that made her exhaustion seem almost secondary to her dedication. When the conversation eventually turned to me, I could feel the subtle shift in energy. The pride and excitement that had animated discussions of my siblings' achievements gave way to polite concern tinged with disappointment. "And how are things going for you, Madison?" Robert asked, cutting his lamb with precision. "Still doing that internet marketing work?" I'd been preparing for this moment, hoping to share some of my recent successes. "Actually, things are going really well. I just signed a contract with a Fortune 500 company to handle their complete digital transformation. And I'm considering some major investments, maybe even buying a house soon." The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia set down her wine glass with the careful movement of someone trying not to react too strongly. Michael exchanged a look with Robert that spoke volumes about their shared concern. "Madison," Robert said slowly, his voice carrying the tone he'd perfected during years of explaining construction realities to overly optimistic clients. "I need to ask you something, and I want you to listen carefully. How much money do you actually have in your bank account right now? The question felt like a slap. After years of building wealth they couldn't imagine, watching them succeed with my secret support and maintaining my modest lifestyle to avoid appearing frivolous, my father was essentially asking if I was delusional about my financial situation. Dad, I understand you're concerned, but no, Madison. I'm serious. Robert's voice grew firmer. Because from where I'm sitting, you're talking about buying a house when you live in a studio apartment that costs $800 a month. You're talking about major investments when you've never held a steady job with benefits. This isn't responsible financial planning, it's fantasy. Patricia joined the intervention with her characteristic gentle concern. Sweetheart, we love you, and we want you to succeed. But you can't build a life on freelance income and wishful thinking. These internet projects might seem exciting, but they're not sustainable career building. Michael leaned forward with his lawyer's instinct for constructive problem solving. Madison, I've seen this pattern with other creative types. They have some early success and think they can skip the traditional steps of career development. But real wealth requires institutional backing, consistent income, and long-term planning. The irony was overwhelming. My brother, who earned an excellent salary but had minimal savings, was lecturing me about wealth building. My parents, whose recent prosperity I'd secretly orchestrated, were explaining financial responsibility to someone whose investment portfolio exceeded their wildest dreams. You need to stop living in this fantasy world, Robert continued, his voice rising with paternal authority. It's time for some tough love. As of tonight, you're cut off from any family financial support. No more safety net, no more help with rent, no family backing for any of these unrealistic schemes you keep dreaming up. Patricia's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded in agreement. It's for your own good, honey. You need to learn financial responsibility before it's too late. Maybe this will motivate you to pursue something more stable. The words hit me like physical blows. After years of secretly supporting their success, protecting their businesses, funding scholarships for Jessica, and maintaining my modest lifestyle to avoid seeming frivolous, they were cutting me off from support I never needed or requested. Michael nodded approvingly. Sometimes people need to hit bottom before they can build something real. This could be the wake-up call you need to get serious about your future. Jessica remained quiet, looking uncomfortable but not disagreeing with the family consensus. Even she, who'd benefited directly from my anonymous generosity, believed I needed this harsh lesson in financial reality. I sat in stunned silence, looking around the dining room that my investments had helped renovate, at family members whose success I'd secretly supported, listening to lectures about financial responsibility from people who had no idea they were talking to someone worth more than all of them combined. The moment had arrived. Years of quiet success, patient building, and modest living had led to this crossroads. I could accept their judgment and continue hiding my truth, or I could finally show them exactly who I'd become. I reached for my phone with steady hands, my heart pounding, but my mind crystal clear. It was time for them to meet the real Madison. The calm that settled over me felt almost supernatural. After years of hiding my success, enduring their concerned lectures, and watching them worry about my financial future while I secretly supported theirs, this moment felt like destiny arriving right on schedule. Actually, I said quietly, setting my napkin beside my plate with deliberate precision, before you finalize this decision about cutting me off, there's something I think you should see. The family exchanged glances that clearly communicated their expectation that I was about to beg for understanding or plead for more time to prove myself. Patricia's expression softened with maternal sympathy, preparing to comfort me through what she assumed would be an emotional breakdown. Instead, I pulled out my phone and opened my investment portfolio app. The device felt weightless in my hands as I placed it in the center of our mahogany dining table, right between Patricia's crystal candlesticks and the fresh orchid centerpiece. Go ahead and look, I said calmly. Take your time. Robert leaned forward first, his construction-trained eyes automatically scanning the screen for important details. I watched his expression change from patronizing concern to confusion, then to something approaching shock as the numbers registered. The portfolio summary showed my total investment value, $2,847,312. Below that, individual holdings were listed in neat rows, showing stocks, real estate investments, private equity positions, and cryptocurrency holdings that most people only read about in financial magazines. This can't be real, Robert whispered, his voice barely audible over the classical music still playing softly in the background. Patricia leaned in beside him, her hand covering her mouth as she processed what she was seeing. Madison, where did these numbers come from? Is this some kind of app game or simulation? Michael's lawyer instincts kicked in immediately. Let me see the actual documentation. Anyone can create fake screenshots these days. I smiled gently and opened my brokerage account, showing real-time positions with that day's market values. Then I opened my real estate holdings, displaying properties I owned across 3 states. Finally, I showed them my business banking account, where my marketing company's revenue had accumulated into a substantial cash position. Look closer at some of these investments, I suggested, scrolling to a particular section. Recognize any company names? Robert's face went pale as he read RB Construction Partnership, Meridian Investment Group, 30% stake, value, $340,000. His hands started shaking as the implications became clear. You own part of my company? He asked, his voice cracking with disbelief. I've been your silent partner for 3 years, I explained matter-of-factly. When you were struggling with cash flow after that permit delay, I bought in through a shell company. That development contract downtown? I owned the properties before the city announced their redevelopment plans. I made sure you were positioned to win those bids. Patricia was scanning through other entries, her marketing background helping her understand the business relationships she was seeing. Luxury Brand Partnerships LLC. That's the company that's been sending us our biggest clients. Another one of my companies, I confirmed. I've been routing business to your firm for 2 years, ensuring you had steady revenue while you transitioned to competitive digital services. Jessica found her name in the education section. Merit Scholar Foundation. That's my scholarship program. You funded my scholarship. I established that foundation specifically to support exceptional medical students. You earned every penny through your academic achievements, but yes, I created the funding source. The silence stretched between us like a physical presence. For people who'd spent years worried about my financial stability were discovering they'd been financially dependent on me without knowing it. Michael was the first to recover his ability to speak. How is this possible? How did you build this kind of wealth? I pulled up my investment history, showing the progression from my first $5,000 stock purchase to my current 8-figure portfolio. Remember that tech company I invested in 3 years ago? DataStream Analytics? Google bought them for $47 million. My stake was worth over $4 million. But you never said anything, Patricia whispered. You lived in that tiny apartment, drove that old car, never bought anything expensive. We thought you were struggling. I wasn't struggling, I replied calmly. I was building. Every dollar I didn't spend on lifestyle inflation went into investments that generated more wealth. I bought assets instead of liabilities. I created income streams instead of expenses. Robert was still staring at the documentation showing I owned nearly a third of his company. Why didn't you tell me? Why the secrecy? The question hung in the air, and I realized this was the moment I'd been unconsciously preparing for throughout years of dismissal and concern. The moment to explain not just what I'd built, but why I'd built it in secret. Because every time I tried to share my successes with you, they were minimized or dismissed, I said quietly. When I made my first big investment gain, you worried about tax implications instead of celebrating my analysis. When I landed major clients, you suggested I needed real experience with established companies. When I talked about the future of digital marketing, your eyes glazed over. Patricia's tears started flowing freely now. We didn't mean to dismiss you. We were worried about your stability, your future security. I understand that, I replied. But your worry was based on assumptions about my capabilities and judgment that were consistently wrong. So I decided to prove myself quietly, building wealth while supporting all of you without your knowledge. Michael was scrolling through more portfolio details, his analytical mind processing the sophisticated investment strategy he was discovering. "This isn't luck," he said slowly. "This is systematic wealth building over years. You've been operating at a level that most financial advisors never reach. I had excellent mentors and access to information through my client relationships," I explained. "When you're marketing for companies in emerging industries, you learn about trends before they hit mainstream awareness. I combined that intelligence with disciplined investment strategies and patient capital deployment." Robert looked up from the phone with an expression I'd never seen before, respect mixed with something approaching awe. "You saved my company. Without this partnership, we would have gone under during the recession. And you helped my firm compete with larger agencies," Patricia added. "Those client referrals that seemed to come out of nowhere, they were from you." Jessica was crying openly now. "My scholarship covered everything: tuition, books, research expenses, even my laptop. I thought I was just incredibly lucky." "You are incredibly talented," I assured her. "I just created opportunities for your talent to flourish without financial stress." The transformation in the room was palpable. 20 minutes earlier, I'd been the family disappointment who needed tough love and financial discipline. Now I was revealed as the family's secret benefactor, the one who'd been ensuring their success while they worried about my failure. But the revelation wasn't complete yet. There was still one more layer to uncover, one final truth that would reshape their understanding of our family dynamics forever. The weight of revelation settled over our dining room like fog rolling in from the ocean. Robert sat back in his chair, his hands still trembling slightly as he processed the complete reversal of everything he'd believed about our family's financial dynamics. For 31 years, he'd been the provider, the stable foundation, the one who worried about everyone else's security. Discovering that his youngest daughter had been secretly supporting his business felt like learning the laws of gravity had been reversed. "I don't understand how I missed this," he said finally, his voice carrying the confusion of someone whose entire worldview had just shifted. "I've been in business for 25 years. I know how to read financial statements, understand market trends, recognize good investments. How did I completely misread your situation?" The question hung between us, and I realized he wasn't just asking about my financial success. He was questioning his fundamental assumptions about intelligence, success, and his role as the family patriarch. "Dad, you didn't misread anything," I said gently. "You saw exactly what I wanted you to see. I deliberately maintained a modest lifestyle because I was raised to believe that flashy displays of wealth were vulgar. I learned that from you and Mom, but somewhere along the way, modest living became confused with financial struggle." Patricia was still studying my phone, scrolling through investment details with the focus she usually reserved for analyzing client marketing campaigns. "Madison, some of these companies. I've never even heard of them. How did you identify opportunities that professional investors missed?" It was a fair question that got to the heart of my competitive advantage. My marketing work gave me access to information that traditional investors don't have. When I helped a small biotech company rebrand, I learned about their revolutionary cancer treatment years before it hit clinical trials. When I designed websites for renewable energy startups, I understood which technologies would scale successfully. I pulled up specific examples, showing them investments in companies they'd never heard of that had generated enormous returns. Traditional investors wait for quarterly reports and analyst recommendations. I was working directly with founders, learning about innovations during the development phase, understanding market potential before products launched. Michael's legal mind was processing the implications of what I was sharing. "This isn't just investment success," he said slowly. "This is systematic intelligence gathering combined with strategic capital deployment. You've been operating like a professional venture capitalist while we thought you were struggling to find stable work. The irony," I continued, "is that your concern about my financial stability actually motivated me to become more financially secure than any of us ever imagined. Every time you worried about my future, I became more determined to build something that couldn't be questioned or dismissed." Jessica looked up from the scholarship documentation she'd been reading. "I feel terrible that I never knew. All those times you came to family dinners and listened to us talk about our achievements while we barely asked about yours. You didn't know to ask, I replied. I was deliberately vague about my work because your reactions taught me that details weren't welcomed or understood. It became easier to smile and nod when you shared your successes than to risk having mine minimized again. The truth of that statement settled over the table like a physical presence. Years of family dynamics suddenly made sense from a completely different perspective. My quiet presence during their celebrations hadn't been lack of ambition, it had been emotional self-protection. Robert was still grappling with the business implications of what he'd learned. The development contract that saved my company, you orchestrated that entire opportunity? I bought distressed properties in the redevelopment zone 18 months before the city announced their plans, I explained. My marketing work with municipal clients gave me early intelligence about their long-term planning. When I saw what they were considering, I realized it would create massive opportunities for custom residential builders with your skill set. But why do it secretly, he pressed. Why not just tell me about the opportunity directly? The question forced me to articulate feelings I'd been avoiding for years. Because I'd tried sharing business insights before, and they were dismissed as unrealistic optimism. Remember when I suggested you should focus more on sustainable building practices? You said it was a passing fad that would never justify the extra costs. Now it's the fastest growing segment of the luxury market. Patricia winced at the memory. We thought we were protecting you from disappointment by tempering your expectations. I understand that, I said. But it created a dynamic where I stopped sharing my analysis and started acting on it independently. When my insights proved correct, I used the profits to support your success rather than claim credit that wouldn't have been acknowledged anyway. Michael was reading through more portfolio details, his expression growing more amazed with each discovery. Madison, you own properties in 3 states, stakes in dozens of companies, investment partnerships with major venture capital firms. This isn't just wealth. This is serious financial power. And I've been using that power to ensure our family's success, I replied. Not because you needed rescuing, but because I love you and wanted to see you thrive. I just did it quietly because open support would have been questioned and resisted. The conversation was interrupted by Patricia's quiet sobbing. Years of worry, misunderstanding, and missed opportunities for connection were pouring out of her in waves of regret and relief. We failed you, she whispered. We were so focused on traditional measures of success that we couldn't see you were creating something extraordinary. I'm so proud of what you've built, and so sorry we made you feel like you had to hide it from us. Jessica moved to comfort our mother, her medical training evident in the gentle way she assessed Patricia's emotional state. Mom, we didn't fail her. Look what she accomplished. But we did miss the chance to celebrate with her along the way. Robert stood up abruptly and walked to the window overlooking his workshop and newly acquired Tesla. That car, he said quietly. I thought I'd earned it through my own hard work. But if you're funding the contracts that made it possible. Dad, you absolutely earned it, I interrupted firmly. I created opportunities, but you executed flawlessly. Your craftsmanship, your reputation, your client relationships, all of that is genuine. I just ensured you had the chance to showcase those skills on projects worthy of your talents. He turned back to face me, and I saw something I'd never seen in his eyes before: recognition. Not just acknowledgement of my success, but recognition of me as a peer, someone whose judgment and capabilities he respected. I owe you an apology, he said simply. And I owe you partnership credit for saving my business. But more than that, I owe you recognition for becoming someone I never imagined possible. The admission hung in the air between us, years of misunderstanding, finally giving way to authentic connection. But there was still one more conversation we needed to have. What happened next? How do you rebuild family relationships when the foundation they were built on turns out to have been completely wrong? In the weeks following what we came to call the Revelation Dinner, our family dynamics underwent a transformation that felt both dramatic and surprisingly natural. It was as if we'd all been playing roles that didn't quite fit, and suddenly we had permission to be ourselves authentically. The most significant change was in my relationship with Robert. Within a month, he'd asked me to become an official partner in RB Construction, not just a silent investor. Our first strategy meeting felt like stepping into an alternate universe, where my business insights were not only welcomed, but actively sought. "I want to understand how you saw the sustainable building trend so early," he said, spreading architectural plans across his desk like a general planning a campaign. "And more importantly, what other trends are coming that I should position us for now?" Working together revealed aspects of his intelligence I'd never recognized. His intuitive understanding of construction logistics, client psychology, and quality control was every bit as sophisticated as my market analysis skills. We discovered that combining his craftsman's wisdom with my strategic thinking created something more powerful than either of us could achieve alone. Patricia's transformation was equally profound. Once she understood the scope of my digital marketing expertise, she asked me to help modernize her firm's service offerings. Our collaboration taught me that her sophisticated understanding of luxury brand psychology was perfectly complementary to my technical knowledge of digital platforms. "I spent years worried about your future," she confided during one of our working sessions, "when I should have been learning from your vision of what that future would look like." We established a formal consulting arrangement where my company provided technical services while her firm handled creative strategy for our shared clients. The partnership generated more revenue in 6 months than either of our companies had produced individually in the previous year. Michael's response was perhaps the most surprising. His legal mind immediately grasped the implications of my investment success, and he became fascinated by the intersection of law and venture capital. He started asking detailed questions about my due diligence processes, contract negotiations with startup founders, and the legal structures I used for complex investments. "I've been thinking about leaving traditional corporate law," he admitted during a Sunday dinner that felt completely different from our previous family gatherings. "What you've built represents the future of how business gets done. I want to be part of that transformation." Within 6 months, Michael had joined one of the venture capital firms I worked with, focusing on legal due diligence for early-stage technology investments. His transition from skeptic to collaborator felt like watching someone discover they had talents they'd never known existed. Jessica's journey was more personal but equally meaningful. Learning that her scholarship had come from me sparked conversations about ambition, family support, and the different ways people show love. She began including me in her medical school experiences, sharing case studies and research projects with the enthusiasm she'd previously reserved for Patricia and Robert. "I realize I never really asked what you were working on," she said during a walk through the park near her hospital. "I was so focused on my own goals that I didn't notice you were building something remarkable." But the deepest healing happened gradually, through hundreds of small moments where we learned to see each other clearly. Sunday dinners became collaborative sessions where we shared not just updates, but actual problems we were trying to solve. My investment insights started influencing Robert's business decisions. Patricia's marketing wisdom shaped my client strategies. Michael's legal expertise protected my business interests. Jessica's scientific thinking improved my research methodologies. The financial dynamics of our family had completely reversed, but more importantly, the emotional dynamics had become authentic. Instead of the careful politeness that had characterized our previous interactions, we developed the easy honesty that comes when people respect each other's capabilities. I maintained my modest lifestyle choices, but now they were understood as deliberate values rather than financial limitations. My small apartment became a symbol of intentional living rather than evidence of struggle. My thrift store wardrobe represented environmental consciousness rather than budget constraints. 6 months after the revelation, I established the Harrison Madison Foundation, named after my mentor William and dedicated to supporting young entrepreneurs from non-traditional backgrounds. The foundation provided not just funding but mentorship, connecting promising business builders with experienced professionals who could guide their development. "Wealth without purpose is just accumulation," William had taught me years earlier. True success means creating opportunities for others to build something meaningful. The foundation's first major initiative was a scholarship program for first-generation college students interested in entrepreneurship. We partnered with business schools to identify students who showed innovative thinking but lacked access to the networks and resources that typically launch successful careers. Our family became deeply involved in the foundation's work. Robert mentored young people interested in construction and skilled trades. Patricia shared her expertise with students developing consumer brands. Michael provided legal guidance for startup ventures. Jessica connected the foundation with medical innovations that needed business development support. Working together on something larger than our individual success created bonds that felt stronger than blood relationships. We'd moved beyond being family members who loved each other despite our differences to being partners who respected each other because of our unique contributions. The irony wasn't lost on me that my parents' decision to cut me off from financial support had actually freed us all to discover more authentic ways of supporting each other. Their well-intentioned intervention had accidentally created space for truth-telling that transformed our relationships entirely. A year after that transformative Sunday dinner, I hosted our family gathering at a new location, the community center attached to our foundation's headquarters. The dining room was simpler than Patricia's formal setup, but the conversation was richer than any we'd shared around our childhood table. I keep thinking about something, Jessica said as we shared dessert and reflected on how much had changed. Madison, you could have walked away from us after the way we treated your success. You could have written us off as people who didn't understand or appreciate what you were building. That thought never occurred to me, I replied honestly. You're my family. The goal was never to prove you wrong. It was to create space for you to know who I really am. Robert raised his glass in a toast that would have been impossible a year earlier. To Madison, who taught us that success isn't about meeting other people's expectations. It's about building something meaningful and sharing it generously. As we clinked glasses, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. Wealth had been the catalyst, but wisdom had been the real transformation. I'd learned that hiding your light doesn't protect relationships, it prevents them from growing. My family had learned that supporting someone means celebrating their authentic path, not trying to redirect them toward familiar territory. The young woman who'd once felt dismissed and misunderstood had become someone whose voice carried weight and whose judgment was trusted. But more importantly, the family who'd once struggled to connect across different definitions of success had learned to appreciate each other's unique contributions to our shared story. If you've ever felt underestimated by the people closest to you, I want you to know that their limitation doesn't define your potential. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give your family is the courage to succeed authentically, even when they can't initially see the value in your path. What family expectations have you had to overcome to pursue your authentic goals? Share your story in the comments below and let me know where you're watching from. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of transformation and empowerment. Don't forget to share this with anyone who needs encouragement to pursue their dreams despite doubters. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember, your worth isn't determined by other people's ability to recognize it. Keep building, keep believing, and keep sharing your gifts with the world. The people who matter will eventually understand, and the ones who don't were never meant to be part of your success story anyway.